You're listening to In Tune. I'm Katie Dehram and it's 5:15. And Tom Donald is my first guest this afternoon. Born in Australia, he's someone who's quite difficult to tie down. Is he a jazz pianist, a film composer, an educator, all of the above? Some have been calling him the next Keith Jarrett, which is quite something to live up to. And he's got a new album out. We're going to be talking about that in a moment. One musical theme, though, runs through his work and the interviews that he gives, and that is the influence of the Baroque. Performing Bach there, that was the Contrapunctus 12 from The Art of Fugue. And I played that for my first guest, Tom Donald, whose album Written in the Scrolls is out at the end of February and whose work includes, well, many, many different things, as I was listing earlier. But Tom, great to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Not at all, our pleasure. Now, Written in the Scrolls, which when I first saw it written down, I thought it said something about trolls, and I got quite excited in a sort of Peer Gynt kind of way. But no, tell us a little bit about that and how Baroque has sort of influenced the way you play and improvise.
Well, this album was quite an interesting journey because when I came to think of putting it together, it was a time where I was really sort of thinking with all of the challenges going on in the world right now, I mean, do we really need another piano album? And how I guess worked through that challenge with myself or within myself was I took the opportunity to just unplug myself from technology, all technology, other than the recording studio, of course, for a week. And during that week, and obviously working in education, we've been working a lot online and using technology, which has been quite a saving grace during this time. However, in that week where I guess, had a complete detox or declutter from technology, I spent a lot of time reading old, ancient texts and just seeing where my imagination would take me. So I like to think of this album as a moment where I jumped in a Renaissance spaceship and just sat down at the piano and improvised, and it really is the result of that sort of process.
I love that idea of a Renaissance spaceship. I think lots of us would quite like to go on one of those, especially at the moment. I mean, how did it sort of make you feel about the music of 300-400 years ago and the way we perform it now? Has it changed your approach?
I think improvisation itself is something that is not given very much credit in classical music. In fact, in classical music, it has played a huge role in its development. We tend to have this I think today, this very binary idea that improvisation is something that belongs in jazz and popular music, and the written score is something that belongs in classical music. But of course, there is so much phenomenal jazz music that has been very, very well composed and thought through that is not improvised to a huge extent. And of course, the development of classical music stemmed from so many improvisory practices, such as the figured bass line. I mean, Bach was an absolutely phenomenal improviser. He also was a phenomenal composer. They are two very different things. But even in that era, the use of building up musical material through improvisation from a figured bass line is becoming somewhat... It may be becoming somewhat a lost art, but I think we're now starting to do a bit of a 180-degree turn and look back and see that a lot of practices in music actually haven't changed that much, and that's really fascinating.
I think, as you say, I think that the two genres are closer than perhaps they get described or get credit for. Is this something that you use in your education work with the London Contemporary School of Piano? I mean, do you encourage your students to improvise?
Absolutely. We really believe in breaking down boundaries, musical boundaries. So if somebody is more if they feel they're more predispositioned to enjoy playing improvisation and jazz, we encourage them to explore improvisation in other contexts, such as in Baroque music and classical music, and vice versa. And this sort of cross-pollination is really exciting, and I think it does make a huge difference to the way people approach and feel music.
Do you feel you've got to get them young? I say this, I was slightly sort of, asking for a friend, hashtag, because having been taught how to play the classical piano, once you're sort of almost quite set in that method of, okay, I'm going to see the music and I'm going to try and replicate it as best I can now on the keyboard. Can you change? Can you sort of, go into a different gear with your brain to learn to let go?
Yes. You don't need to start young. In fact, sometimes it's best to have a life behind you of traditional training, because that's something you can draw on. And then you can approach the piano with a completely blank slate and look at it as a completely different thing, obviously with help around you and also just the ability to let go. We improvise every day. We improvise when we speak. We're not reading from a script right now. We have the resources in our brain to leverage the wonderful scales and patterns that a musical instrument has and just talk with it and not be scared to fail. When I use the word fail, I mean slip around and just see what happens and just enjoy that moment. I think improvisation is more about continuity than it is just purely perfection for its own purpose. And I think at any age this can be explored.
This is very inspiring. Thank you, Tom. Let's hear some of your music. We've got much more to talk about, but let's hear a track now. We're going to hear Homecoming Warrior. And if I play it, and then you can tell us a bit about it afterwards. Tom Donald there from his album Written in the Scrolls, and that was Homecoming Warrior. And Tom, I know that you said you were reading a lot of ancient texts and so on to prepare during your digital detox to record these improvisations. So what were you thinking there? What had you just been reading before you played that?
Well, with improvisation, it's often very hard to remember what happens. It's like, particularly in that piece, there is a bit of rage in the moment. But I do remember I was reading quite a few Celtic myths. I was reading quite a few Aboriginal Dreamtime stories from Australia, which has been quite an influence to me for many years. And I also remember at that time I was reading some rather dodgy transcriptions of when I say translations of hieroglyphics, and I don't think it was all entirely accurate, but it did definitely set my imagination off. And I think during that whole process, there were a couple of things that definitely revealed itself to me, quite a few revelations. And one was, despite all of these big challenges in the world, it seems like things just happen over and over again, and challenges have been going on for many years. And it sort of gave me a strange sense of security as I just sort of dived into these pieces. I sort of felt like the past and the future had this sort of strange connection to each other. Now, for the title of that piece, for many of these improvisations, I tend to not listen to them until a few weeks later because I don't really know what's happened. It's just this process where your imagination goes off. And I remember sharing some of these pieces with some of my students, and they even suggested some titles. And one of my students came up with the title of that piece, and I thought it was a fitting name.
Well, talking of your students, I know that you're offering with the London Contemporary School of Piano this series of free interactive music sessions starting tomorrow, I believe. Tell us a little bit about those. What's actually on the agenda?
Yeah, a few weeks ago we were having a discussion with all of the members of the school and many of the staff, and we just felt that people at the beginning of this year felt a little bit tired after what has been quite a long winter. And we felt we wanted to just try a different initiative and a different approach. And what we decided we'd do was come up with a nationwide program for children homeschooling to inspire them, to get them up on their feet, rather than it just being another Zoom class, something where they can get up on their feet. It's not piano classes. This is musical appreciation classes for children between the ages of 6 and 12. I mean, we have a bit of everything on this program, and it's running every week at different timings. We've got a morning class, and then on some weeks it's an afternoon class, so families have a bit of flexibility in choosing their times. But these classes are designed to get them up on their feet, looking at different musical instruments. It's not just piano. We have an amazing lineup of UK-based musicians in many genres, and it's going to be quite an exciting program. I think it's just something positive to do this February, as there is a lot of uncertainty out there right now, and we've asked children. It's definitely occurred to me over the last year. We've asked children to sacrifice a lot. And they're not always at the forefront of the conversation. And I just hope it's something that will give them some inspiration, and maybe some kids after that will decide to take up some different musical instruments and make music a bigger part of their lives, which I think is really important.
Well, all power to you. I think you're preaching to the choir here, my goodness me, both on this show and also people listening at home. I'm sure they'll be sending you loads of support, and I hope logging in with their kids and their grandkids and getting involved and jumping up and down a bit. That'll be wonderful. Listen, it's such a treat to talk to you, Tom. We've got another track from your album. This one's Speaking with the Afterlife. But thank you. Speak again soon. Take care of yourself.
Thank you very much.
Recorded in just one take, that improvisation from Tom Donald is called Speaking with the Afterlife, and the album Written in the Scrolls is out on February the 28th. And the London Contemporary School of Piano sessions, which won't just be featuring the piano, but all instruments for youngsters from the age of 6 to 12, will be open from tomorrow at 11 a.m. They sound great, so do check them out.
Franz Schubert is my composer of the week. He was only 31 when he died, yet he ranks as one of the most prolific composers of all time. His